students, my name is Ayla Kugona, your facilitator for this course, Indigenous Knowledge Management, LIS 212. Today's lecture, we're going to discuss the types and components of indigenous knowledge. Let's get back to class. Today's lesson on LIS 212, Indigenous Knowledge Management, will be on the types and components of indigenous knowledge. My name is Ailaku Ugonna, your facilitator for the course. After today's lesson, we should be able to list the types of indigenous knowledge, giving examples of each, and also be able to list the components of indigenous knowledge too. From our previous classes, you all can define indigenous knowledge. You can state the scope and importance of indigenous knowledge. Now, I would like us to take a look at the first class activity for today and answer the question. So, types of indigenous knowledge. There are two types of indigenous knowledge. One is the explicit indigenous knowledge, and the second one is known as the tacit indigenous knowledge. The explicit indigenous knowledge. Have any one of you heard about explicit indigenous knowledge? Can you define it? Well, you can define the explicit indigenous knowledge as the type of knowledge that is easily shared, taught, articulated, expressed, communicated, and also is recorded or documented. As this class is on, and I'm teaching you right now, this method of knowledge sharing is what you can refer to as explicit knowledge, while the tacit indigenous knowledge is quite the opposite of the explicit knowledge. A tacit knowledge is the type of knowledge that is embedded in the brain or mind of the owner, of the creator of the knowledge. It is not shared nor taught. It is only if the person that is the creator or the owner of that knowledge, of the indigenous knowledge, decides to share the knowledge, can you have access to it. Take a look at this picture on the slide. We all can see a woman knitting a asoke. As she's knitting it, she's not sharing the knowledge because she's the only one in the picture. That knowledge of how to make this asoke, this material that is peculiar to the Yorubas, is embedded in her brain. It is her knowledge. It's only if she decides to share it with another person can that person have access to that knowledge on how to knit the asoke. So for now, it's regarded as a tacit knowledge because she's not sharing it. I had said earlier that a tacit knowledge is quite difficult to extract from the brain of an individual with the indigenous knowledge, except if he or she decides or wants to share the knowledge with another person. Components of indigenous knowledge. These are the components of indigenous knowledge. I would like to ask every one of you to please refer back to your course material on Indigenous Knowledge Management LIS 212, where all the components were discussed in details. But I will still list the components of indigenous knowledge. We have the cultural indigenous knowledge, the artistic indigenous knowledge, medicinal indigenous knowledge, the biodiversity or natural resources indigenous knowledge. We have the agricultural indigenous knowledge, and we have the sacred indigenous knowledge. When you come think about or you want to discuss the cultural indigenous knowledge, is that particular indigenous knowledge that is peculiar to a particular culture. Every tribe in Nigeria have a particular cultural indigenous knowledge that is known to them. Likewise, the artistic indigenous knowledge that we had discussed in our previous lesson, where I gave an example of the Southern West musical culture, that they like to play the Fuji or the Juju music, while the Easterners are known to play the Egwu Ogene. Then the medicinal indigenous knowledge, as the name implies, has to do with the medical aspect of indigenous knowledge. The Yorubas have what they call the Agbo. They have particular herbs that can cure particular diseases or can help to reduce or eliminate particular diseases. Then we have the biodiversity or natural resources indigenous knowledge. This has to do with the natural resources in our various communities. Some communities have gold, some have coal, like the Enugu. They are known to be the coal miners. And coals are the natural resources that you can easily find in the east, in Enugu to be precise. Then the agricultural indigenous knowledge, it has to do with farming, preservation of the farm fruits. The sacred indigenous knowledge has to do with a particular sacred indigenous knowledge peculiar to each communities. Please still go back to your course material and read all these components of indigenous knowledge. For the class activity, I would like you to attempt this. So I'll be expecting your response for the last class activities. Send it to my email, which I will provide at the end of this lesson. So far in this lesson, we have learned the types of indigenous knowledge from different perspectives. We also learned examples of indigenous knowledge, and under each type we gave examples. We were able to list the components of indigenous knowledge. Please send your response to the last class activity to vilaku@now.edu.ng. I promise I will respond as soon as I get your mail. My name is Ailaku Ugonna, and should you have any question as regards this course, no matter the topic, please, you can still send an email to me, which I will refer back to you. For now, it's bye.